This is my activist CV. As such, I'm going to scoot past that. What I want to do is emphasize something that's missing from that activist CV, which spanned from the late 70s right up into the 80s, which is vegan education. Now, Ronnie Lee, the co-founder of the ALF, talks about this as well. And essentially what it means is that throughout the 1980s, we were all vegans as individuals, and we would talk about veganism if people asked, but it wasn't central to our campaigning in the way that it is now. So in Francione's terms, I'll see what happens. Now I'm going to have to do this out without the mic now, because that's the mic, okay? So it was never the moral baseline. So we all did single issues. We campaigned against fur, we were hunt saboteurs, everything else. We didn't talk much about veganism. I did hundreds of radio and some TV interviews, and we didn't talk about veganism. It wasn't the way it is right now. So in terms of veganism being central to our type of campaigning, whether we want to talk about animal rights or whatsoever, this is new. So this is the takeaway message of this session. Vegan campaigning is a new thing. So if someone turns around to you and says, we've been doing this for years and years and years and we're not getting anywhere, it's not true. We've only just begun. From about the 1990s, mid-1990s, 2000s, that's when we started to put veganism at the core of our campaigning. It's very difficult sometimes for the new activists who come into the movement to understand this. We never talked about veganism in those days, you know? So vegan education is a new thing. Now, even though it's new, and the reason I'm here really to defend it is because veganism is currently under attack, and consistent veganism in particular is under attack from within the movement. Okay, let's try and flesh that out a little bit. A lot of people in certain groups will tell you that veganism is a scare word. That if you talk about veganism, you're going to scare people away, you're going to terrify them, they'll run away from animal rights and they'll never listen to you ever again. There's this crazy vegan stereotype being perpetrated by some of the people in the movement. The crazy vegan stereotype is not we know that things can get a bit heavy on Facebook, we know that. But this is street activism that's being talked about here. The crazy vegan stereotype is people out on the streets, waving their hands wildly in the air, screaming at people. Now, I've done street stuff ever since the 1980s, and I've never ever seen that. And yet, we've got people now in our movement going around to conferences worldwide telling people about this vegan stereotype, about the crazy vegan, and that you should avoid it. Essentially, we're getting to this idea. There's an idea that in the movement that we're in this phase, a pre-vegan phase. And what you shouldn't do in a pre-vegan phase is talk about veganism. And you shouldn't talk about animal rights, and you shouldn't talk about anti-speciesism, because this is all a little bit too much for people to take in. Anybody that's actually done any vegan education knows that this is not true. Okay? Now, there are some people now who are claiming that veganism should be redefined in order for vegans to eat non-vegan stuff. Okay? Some people want veganism to be redefined so animal products can be eaten. Some people argue, well, would you eat a lump of animal flesh if somebody paid you enough? And they argue that your answer should be yes. because then you can use the money for whatever animal welfare or whatever they're going to do. This phrase here, this rabbit, the idea that with this rabbit, you've got a friend, and every year they eat a rabbit, and you're supposed to join in. Why? Because you're not supposed to upset them. You're not supposed to say, no, I'm an ethical, consistent vegan, I won't do that, because that's off-putting. You should join in and eat the rabbit. So you don't upset the person who wants to eat the rabbit, you eat the rabbit as well. Now, people don't say, oh, this trafficked person, you know, like, oh, there's a brothel down the street, and there's this trafficked person that comes every now and again, you know, they haven't been violated too much, so do you want to join in with that? We'd say, no, we're human rights activists, we won't do that, it's against our principles. The same should apply with this rabbit. Where the divide is here at the bottom. The professionals and the civilians. There are people in this movement who regard themselves as the professionals, and they would regard everybody in this room as civilians. Okay? They are the paid staff, the careerists of the movement. They are the ones who are sliding away from veganism as fast as they can, because it's not very sellable in their own terms. They prefer veg, or veggie, or vegetarian, because if they focus on the ethics and on veganism, it reduces their market. Their market is connected to their job. And so the careerists in the movement are pulling back from the idea of veganism. And I think this is wrong. There was, must be about 3 years ago now, somebody tried to introduce the phrase lacto-vegan into the lexicon, that we could be a lacto-vegan. At the moment, there's this idea going around that we could be a vegan except for bacon. You can be a vegan except for bacon. And then there are some people who argue that if you take the idea, this is a more philosophical idea, if you take the idea that veganism is about suffering, then if you were, as it were, walking behind a deer and she has a heart attack and dies in front of you, you could cut a slice of venison from that deer and consume that and still remain a vegan. These people also think that roadkill is a vegan thing. That sometimes we've got the arguments about backyard hens, as we know. We've always had arguments about honey. It's been a major problem for the vegan society over the years. And we still get on Facebook arguments about horse riding. Can vegans ride horses? This kind of thing. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and a lot of it is about sliding away from the original meaning. I might not be able to see this, so I'll read this out. There are three groups that we're talking about, really. Reducetarians, this new phrase, vegetarians, and vegans. Okay? So we've got a big push at the moment for reducetarianism. I don't know whether people are aware of that, but there's a big push at the moment for that. A lot of the careerists are getting in on this because they think it's a foot in the door type of thing. Now, we could argue about whether we should object to reducetarianism or not, or vegetarianism as or not, but the real problem with this is this, the numbers. The numbers of reducetarians are fairly large, because these are people who just reduce. The numbers of vegetarians is fairly large as well. Now we all know that of all the groups, the vegans are the smallest group, okay? And yet, this is the problem. From my point of view, as a vegan campaigner, this is the problem. Because what these people want you to do as vegans is to stop doing the vegan work and do the reducetarian work and the vegetarian work instead, or as well as. Now, I argue that that's not what we should do. We are a minority. Veganism is not a scare word. It's not going to put anybody off if you talk to them. My presentation that's about to start is about our work in Dublin. We're openly vegan in Dublin. We've got 5 or 6 hours every week, vegan information day, big stalls, and nobody is frightened of us. In fact, I would describe people at the moment as vegan curious. This is not the time in the history of vegan education to start pulling away from the thing that we want. We want veganism. There's nothing wrong with telling people what we want. We don't have to be a politician about this. This is not a game, this is ethics. And it's not a job. So we shouldn't be thinking about our P45s and our wage bills. When we make ethical decisions, that shouldn't be the basis of them. What should be the basis of them is ethics themselves. What is right and what is wrong. So, the question I asked there is, why are these people trying to get the vegans to do the other positions people's work? And I think the reason for that is because it's the vegans who are the activists of those three groups. Now, I know that's a controversial thing. A lot of people say, you know, we're sick of the kind of cupcake vegans, and the vegans who just kind of eat things and take film of themselves making recipes and all this kind of stuff. But of all those three groups, the one that is most likely to be active and get out there on the street and do stuff are the vegans. This is why it seems to me that these people are wanting the vegans to do less than vegan stuff. Now, it seems to me this is wrong. And this is something that we should be aware of, which is why I'm doing this presentation in case you're not. Because there is a real move to slide away. And perhaps from surprising sources like Melanie Joy, for example. But Melanie Joy has always been controversial in this situation because she talks about carnism. As we know, she claims carnism, or you know, that's the opposite of veganism. Actually, it's the opposite of vegetarianism. She knows that carnism, she says that carnism is a sub-ideology of speciesism. The big problem that we face as animal rights advocates, as vegans, is cultural speciesism. It's not carnism, because carnism is about meat eating. That's not the entire picture, right? You watch a Melanie Joy video and count the number of times she talks about meat rather than other animal products. The real problem is cultural speciesism, not a subset of it, which is what carnism focuses on. And so she's part of this new cartel, along with people like Tobias Leonhardt and her own husband, who are part of this group now, who are going around, going to conferences and speaking to groups of young, impressionable vegans, and effectively telling them that the best way to advance veganism is by not being vegan, by consuming animal products if it's convenient, or if you get into a sticky situation. Leonhardt comes up with the most bizarre kind of thought experiments and hypotheticals in order to get the vegans trapped into a situation. Like, for example, this one. You're in a restaurant. Somebody in the next table is eating a steak, but then they start feeling ill and leave, and then leave the steak. They've only taken a couple of bites. If a rich person paid you enough, would you finish the steak? He says. He comes up with all these bizarre hypotheticals because he wants to get the situation where vegans will say that in some circumstances they will consume other animals, you know, and it's because there's supposed to be some kind of payoff sometime in the future. The problem with it is there's no ethics in it, because what it does is it sanctions the violation of animal rights now in order for some putative assumed benefit in the future. You know, it's wrong. You know, we shouldn't be going around encouraging vegans to start eating other animals again because it looks good. You know, he says things like, you know, don't scrutinize labels. That doesn't look very good. You know, if you see somebody in the supermarket, you know, that's going to put people off, maybe for life. No, they're just reading at some labels, you know. People read labels for all kinds of reasons, you know. But if you've got ethics and that's the reason you're reading the label, that's not a bad thing, that's a good thing. That's something we should explain, not kind of shy away from. It's ridiculous. What's going on is ridiculous. Veganism at the moment needs to be defended from within the animal movement. It's a crying shame, but it's also very true. Just want to finish off with this. The co-founder of the Vegan Society, Donald Watson, said that we can't hang around waiting for an idea to kind of come to us. And then we go, oh yeah, we believe that. He had a phrase called ripening up. He says you have to ripen people up to a new idea. And as I said at the start, in terms of education, veganism is a new idea. It only started in 1944 as a social movement. Nobody did any campaigning about it until the late 1990s. We're talking about a brand new idea. We need to ripen people up. The way we do that is by talking to them about this new fancy fangled idea called veganism. They won't run away screaming. They'll listen to you. You put together a rational argument for veganism, and there's plenty, as we know. It's not going to be a problem. So what we should do, and you know, if you like what I said, if you go away from here and you see any of these arguments by the so-called vegan strategists or other people who want to say to vegans, don't do veganism, ignore that. Please ignore that. There are plenty of people who are reducetarians. There are more vegetarians than vegans. Let them do it. If they want to promote reducetarianism and vegetarianism, let them do it. We should be busy on veganism.
Can I just put up a couple of things? I don't think it's strictly factually correct to say that veganism, the promoting of veganism started in the 90s, because in the 70s and 80s, the women's movement was promoting animal rights, which is how I actually became a vegan myself. There was a group called Sequel, run by Giselle Morris and Norma Belli. They used to run a lesbian magazine, but they were really into promoting veganism, and they challenged me about my eating habits, and then I got sent ALF leaflets, stuff like that. And there was a group in Bristol called Lair, which were, again, was feminists promoting veganism and animal rights.
Yeah, okay, what's being said is that the promotion of veganism is earlier than that. There's a lesbian group in somewhere.
London, I think it was.
Doing that. Now the thing is that we're talking about small stuff, really.
Yeah.
I'm talking more about a kind of overarching thing, you know.
I think the women's movement, they did promote it a lot.
The conversation has changed. The chances are that if you talk to any of your friends, colleagues, whatever, about your views, animal rights, veganism will come up fairly early, probably, in your conversation. It never used to come up before. It is relatively new in this kind of movement-wide sense. That's what I mean. The problem is that there's business reasons to start to pull back. Now, they're not good reasons. Business reasons are not good reasons to pull back from ethics. That is not on, because the ethics are strong. You know, the ethics are good. That's not a problem at all. How are we doing for time?
Also, you're getting now a thing where people are promoting veganism as a lifestyle, like Hogan Costin with vegan dog food, but it's about lifestyle, isn't it? It's about animal rights. It isn't how you eat and you don't wear leather. It is all that, but it isn't about that. It's about animal rights and not food. And this is where I think it's going on a bit as well.
Well, that is true. The point being made was that veganism is more than a lifestyle, it's more than philosophy, it's about animal rights, it's not a diet. Now, that's another problem. There's a lot of people now trying to characterize veganism as a diet. Leonard will say, our movement is about food. No, it's only partly about food. Our movement is about justice. There are a lot of people who are slimming down veganism. You know, veganism has never been about diet, never been about health. It's never been just about our relations with other sentient beings, our relations with other animals. It's always been wider than that. If we were to start the vegan society now, we would probably call it intersectional in nature. It was a very radical idea. I know they looked like gardeners and they were polite English gentlemen or whatever, but they had a very radical idea. They were conscientious objectors. The vegan society was started while the Second World War was raging. They saw the vegan society and veganism as part of the peace movement. And also they saw veganism as part of the moral evolution of humanity. It's a massive idea. Donald Watson said it's the greatest cause on earth. It's the greatest cause on earth, by which I think he means it was an umbrella term to incorporate everything else. And in our modern way of thinking, I think that means that, contrary to what Francion's recently said, I don't think that vegans could be sexist and racist and presumably fascist. Francione argues that you can have a sexist vegan. How? How does that work? Because veganism, the principle of veganism is justice for all. That's the core principle. It's about justice for all. We're trying to get the concept of justice over the species barrier in the same way as Tom Reagan succeeded to some degree of getting the concept of rights over the species barrier. That's what we're trying to do with the idea of justice. You know, we don't do that. We can't protect animal rights by trampling on women's rights. We can't talk about, you know, the justice of not exploiting other animals if we're being racist. Peter dressing up as the Ku Klux Klan, you know, all that nudity rubbish going on, you know, sexism and racism and fascism has got no place in the vegan movement because we're about justice. That's not just. That's the opposite of justice. We've got to rethink this through and stop slimming it down. Wherever the slimming down is coming from, we've got to think critically about that because it's a big idea. We don't need to make it smaller so it's palatable or saleable. You know, it's a revolutionary idea. There's nothing wrong with that. We just need to understand it and propound it. Don't be frightened of it. Talk about it. That's what we need to do.